When I'm comparing and ordering integers, it's very important that I'm paying attention to which integers are negative and which are positive. 0 offers a nice anchor for myself. It's also important to keep in mind that this number line is like a mirror. So if over on this side I know that 1/100th is less than 2/3, then the 1/100th is closer to 0. On that negative side, that if it were negative 1/100th, that would be closer to 0 than negative 2/3. So I want to be able to look at that number line like a mirror so that I see that if something were closer to 0 on this side, then it would also be closer to 0 on the other side as well. So 1 is really close to 0, and negative 1 would also be close to 0. 5,000 is far away from 0 on this side, so negative 5,000 would be far away from 0 on this side. So here is just an example of how I might order some different numbers. Now, of course, this matters if I'm being told to order numbers from negative to positive, from like least to greatest or greatest to least. If I'm ordering them greatest to least, then that's most positive to most negative. If I am ordering least to greatest, that's going to be most negative to most positive. Now, why am I using those terms, most negative and most positive? Because I think it's helpful to remember that the least number is going to look like a big number, like negative 500. It's going to look like a big number, but it's actually a really small number. Negative 500 is not a good number to have in your bank account, for instance, because that is further negative, further away from 0. Okay, so looking here, I have like negative 500 going from least to greatest, negative 500 to negative 3, negative 1/2 or 5/10, 0.5, to negative 1/10 or 0.1. Then I have 1/100th or 0.01, 2/3, 5,378. So that's my greatest number. Now, if I'm comparing certain numbers, then I can take some different things into account as well. So once again, I'm taking into consideration how far away it is from 0, that absolute value, and I'm considering which side it's on. So if I'm comparing two positive numbers, then the greater positive number is always going to win. If I'm comparing two negative numbers, the one that's closer to 0 is greater. So negative 1 is greater than negative 7. Because now if those were positive numbers, of course, it would be 1 is less than 7. The reason for that being that I'm looking at that number line like a mirror. Where are those numbers in relationship to 0? Where are they on the number line? Negative 1 is closer to 0 than negative 7. If I'm only negative $1 in debt, or it's negative 1 degree outside, that is warmer, that's higher than negative 7 degrees outside. Okay, so between 0 and 2 and negative 2 is less. Any negative number is going to be less than 0. Any positive number is going to be greater than 0. So this 1/2 is greater than 0. Negative 3/4 and 3/4. Now, if these had absolute value marks on them, absolute value of negative 3/4 and the absolute value of 3/4, those are equal. 3/4 is positive. Positive always wins over negative. So it's always better to have $1 than any kind of negative amount. Okay, 4 greater than negative 3. And of course I could flip these around to say that 4 is greater than negative 3. So that sign can go back and forth. So when you're comparing and ordering integers, it's important that you're taking into consideration, are there any absolute value signs? For instance, if this were the absolute value of negative 500. The absolute value of negative 500 is actually 500. So it would not go here, it would go over here on my number line. So be sure that you're paying attention to absolute value signs, knowing that absolute value is always positive.